Hey everybody, it's Ted Bogert back with the TED Show. Very, very excited. Always have a good time when my friend Dr. Joseph Rosado is on the show. Welcome, Joe, back.
Yes, back to back. This is our three-peat.
It's our three-peat. I know you are so full of amazing information.
I'm full of a lot of stuff.
I said that and I thought, man, you know what I meant.
You cheated really hard.
I cheated. So Joe is such a wealth of information when it comes to pretty much anything, but certainly medical cannabis. And he just takes a really, really unique, wonderful approach, a humane and human approach. Long before it was cool to do it, Joe was out there being an advocate, and it's always a pleasure to have you on, my friend.
Always a pleasure being on. And, you know, I didn't plan this, but the bow tie goes with your shirt.
It really does.
In fact, I'm going to take that pocket square and stick it right in here.
You should totally take that pocket. I think you did that last time. But he's got the socks to match, and he's got a book out, Open Healing, right?
Yes, and
very excited.
The socks have the cover of the book, and a shout out to the sock gallery, the twin brothers, Twin Power, Marcus and Mario Taylor. Marcus and Mario Taylor was found in the Oviedo Mall. They've created my socks to match the cover of my book.
So looks really good.
You will see those pictures on my website, which you will get all that information, or on my social media tags here shortly.
All right. So for those of you who don't know, for those of the people who don't know you, give them a little bit of background on you. You are a MD. You've got a phenomenal journey that got you here. So tell them a little bit about it.
40 plus years in medicine.
You look so good. We talked about this beforehand.
Yes, I'm older than him.
Which is insane. No comments from the peanut gallery out there.
We won't say how old, but if someone can guess how much older I am than him, what do you want to give them? Let's do a giveaway. Since you still owe me a bottle of champagne for that last one, I'll relinquish that bottle of champagne.
Okay, we'll give him a bottle of champagne. That's good. I like that.
To whoever can guess how much older I am than Ted.
Nobody's going to believe it because you look amazing.
Anyway, so my history began at 16 here in Central Florida. I started out as an orderly nurse's aide at Florida Living. I don't know what it's called now, but it used to be Florida Living in Forest City / Apopka. Then Florida Hospital Orlando as a transportation orderly in the X-ray department from 78 to 1980. Then EMT, then EMT paramedic, then cath lab technician, EMT paramedic here in the Central Florida area with Herndon Ambulance, and then Florida Rural Metro. Then a cath lab technician at Florida Hospital Orlando. Then chiropractic school, chiropractor. Then after 5 years of practice as a chiropractor, I went to medical school because I was frustrated with the limited scope of practice and I wanted to help more people.
Sure.
And then from medical school, I went on and got an MBA in healthcare management because they teach us how to be doctors, they don't teach us how to be businessmen. And so
you have done a lot of schooling, my friend. for such a young age, you've really done a ton. And you also worked your way up. That's one of the things I love about your story, is you started at the lowest end of, mostly the lowest end of the totem pole in the healthcare field and really worked your way up. Was there a time where you didn't want to be a medical doctor, then all of a sudden, at some level in that whole journey, you said, all right, enough of this, I want to be in this field?
No, ever since the age of 3, I knew I wanted to be a medical doctor, which that story is in my book. We won't share that today because we have way too much to cover.
We do have a lot to cover.
But the story of how I decided to be a medical doctor is found in my book, Hope and Healing, The Case for Cannabis, in English and in the language of God, as my grandfather would say, Spanish.
I love it. All right, so tell them a little bit about your journey from that, because that's a long journey. And then you became, in my opinion, every time I would ask somebody in the beginning when we started doing the show, who can I get to come on and that has an authority or can talk authoritatively about cannabis, and your name kept coming up. But that wasn't always a popular jump. That wasn't always a thing that people in the medical profession, especially doctors, got involved with. So what was your journey on that?
The original was in medical school, where we talked very, very briefly on the endocannabinoid system. And for those of you that don't know, you do produce cannabinoids, you do produce cannabis, not in the form of THC or CBD, but you do produce cannabis in your body. And so, which again, that information is in the book. Sorry,
he put it in the book.
He put me up to it.
I did.
Anyway, but it began in medical school where I learned about the endocannabinoid system, again, very briefly. And then in 2010, when medical cannabis became legal in Arizona, a friend of mine reached out to me to be the medical director of his company, because in Arizona it was required to have a medical director as part of your company, your corporation. Anyway, his wife decided that that would not be a thing to do. Shout out to Don and Jan Dirth, Dr. Don Dirth, a chiropractor extraordinaire he's in Mesa, Arizona, Mesa, Tempe area. Anyway, very easy to find, Dearth, Don. Anyway, I got involved in that regard to be the medical director in Arizona. That didn't pan out. And then I waited 4 more years. And then in 2014, in fact, 6 years ago, last month, when our attorney friend, John Morgan, started promoting the Amendment 2, which was the decriminalization of medical cannabis. And I sent him an email and said, I'm a physician, I'm an advocate, how do I get involved? And within 24 hours, I was speaking with the campaign manager, Ben Palara, and then a week later, I was on their Bureau of Speakers, and pretty much the rest has been history.
And it went all smoothly, right? I know parts of the story. I know a lot of the story, but I think it's important for people to understand that this is actually was a big deal for you to step outside of that normal, quote unquote, medical doctor arena to become a proponent and advocate.
I had colleagues, family members, friends, patients, pretty much disown me, for lack of a better term. You know, I had patients come into my office and literally insult me. You know, as good of a physician as you are, how dare you, go into this and start pushing and promoting drugs? And, I mean, they were very, very aggressive. Had family members that have chosen not to speak with me or not to engage with me because of the choices I've made professionally to transition from primary care medicine to medical cannabis. Presently, I just do follow-ups because of all the traveling that I'm doing and certain circumstances in my life that have led me to do just follow-ups and things like that. But, come June, that's going to be changing, and we'll be keeping you up to date. But, I was the first in the greater Central Florida area to recommend medical cannabis in Volusia. It was in Volusia County, but from Tampa to the state line, I was the first to recommend to an adult. And then 3 months after that, in November of 2016, I was the first in the state to recommend to a pediatric patient, a 15-year-old boy who had stage 4 terminal cancer of the head and neck. A very sad story. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us, but the reason for the bow tie, and those of you that may not have heard the story, his brand were hats and bow ties. And so whenever I'm speaking on the topic of cannabis, I rock the bow tie in honor and in memory of Juju.
You do rock the bow tie. You know what I think people don't realize, because it's become almost, not as commonplace, or at least it's become more acceptable mainstream. We're talking about it. We can actually have a conversation about it, and people aren't, trying to hang you for it. But it's different because in our minds we hold physicians at a higher level of accountability, and because it's been so pounded into our brains that marijuana is a bad thing, a bad drug for whatever reason, all the propaganda, you still have hurdles that you have to overcome. When you had to deal with children, and I don't know how much you can talk about, but that immediately, I'm sure people were like, what the heck are you talking about? An 18-year-old, I get it, but a 15-year-old with stage 4 cancer, isn't there something else that they can do? But there really wasn't.
No, I mean, they've exhausted all modes of medications. This child was on a morphine pump, getting 16 milligrams of morphine, infused into his vein. And, the patient that brought us, the patient's mother that brought you and I together, Trisha Dennis, brought
Yes, Trisha.
Noah, to my office. And Trisha was the one that connected the two of us, because you were looking for someone and she had already been to my office, and that's how we connected. Her son with schizencephaly, which is an atrocity. A child, it's a combination between cerebral palsy and epilepsy, and they have severe seizure activity with severe chronic muscle spasms and constant chronic pain, and are on a host of medications, none of which were helping.
Right.
So,
I mean, as a parent, of course, one of the things Trisha will tell you is her journey. She's been on the show before. Is that it was such a challenge even for her, and as a parent, the last thing, and you've been through it, right? The last thing you want to do is to see your child suffer, and you'll do anything. You're going to go outside of all of your foundational beliefs at that point to try to figure out, what can I do to ease the pain of my child? And so I'm sure
yes,
that was a challenge, so you got pushback.
Yes, lots of pushback. But little by little, people are opening up. Patients are coming to our office, and we're helping quite a few people. We're helping people get off of opiates. We're getting people get off of benzos, which we know that there is an opiate crisis, and soon, a benzodiazepine, crisis. People addicted or dependent on, Xanax or clonazepam or Valium to offset different things, and the side effects of those medications are far greater than really the benefits of those medications. And so this is a natural alternative. It is a plant. It's been around, according to literature, 3000 BC in Asia. There's documentation, through hieroglyphics that it was used for medicinal purposes.
I have no doubt.
So it has been available for all those years. So, let's open our minds, step into the 21st century, and move away from the mindset of many of our politicians that still believe that cannabis is a gateway drug. The gateway drug is not cannabis. The gateway drug is a legal drug. It's called alcohol. Or the gateway drug is really the first drug that your dealer gives you for free to get you hooked to come back.
Correct. All right, so what was the impetus behind writing the book? What was the thought process? Why did you want to come out and write Hope and Healing? There's obviously got to be, you're always traveling, you're speaking at amazing conferences around the world, trying to educate people, trying to really bring it to the masses, your message. Why the book?
Because when I first got into this movement 6 years ago, and I was researching and reaching out for information, there really wasn't anything available.
That's crazy, isn't it?
And because there was nothing available that was, spoken to the patient, spoken to the advocate, but also speaking to the physicians, because most of us are not taught anything about the endocannabinoid system or how cannabis works in the body and the benefits of cannabis to our bodies. And so, although I was researching articles that were written by the original pioneer, Raphael Mechoulam, and his sidekick, Professor Lemire Hanoush, who wrote the foreword to my book, who named the first endocannabinoid, anandamide. He named it when it was discovered in 1992. So it's relatively new, So as a result of all of that information and lack thereof, I created, that was my why, writing a book that was able to educate the masses. And then, obviously writing it in English because that's where I live, but then opening it up to those that are not able to read the English language. And then since I was here last, which was April of last year, I have last year I visited 7 countries and 3 different states. Starting with Costa Rica, which was not very friendly. I was almost strip searched by the national police because I was on the front page and promoting medical cannabis, and they thought I had smuggled cannabis into the country. So I was searched quite extensively by the national police. So I started my journey in Costa Rica, then Rome, Italy, then Tokyo, Japan, then Malaysia, then Mexico City, then Mexico City, then Colombia, Medellin, and then lastly Fiji. Fiji was interesting because there I didn't speak to any physicians. It was a group full of attorneys because it was the 21st annual Attorney General Conference where he holds every year a conference in Fiji, beautiful resort on one of the most beautiful beaches in the world, and all of the attorneys for the region show up. So there were attorneys there from Samoa, Tonga, Australia, New Zealand, Fiji, among all of their different specialties, and spoke on medical cannabis.
What was their approach back to you? I'm curious on the attorneys especially. Were they there to help the law so it becomes easier? Was their response to you like, "You're crazy, man, we're just going to continue to blockade it, thanks for the information," to make it more difficult or easier?
It was mixed. It was interesting because after my presentation, and we had the opportunity to sit and have a conversation, the Attorney General and the DPP, which was the Director of Public Prosecutors, the DPP shared a story with me. A few weeks prior to my arriving the island of Fiji, they had found an individual who had X amount of cannabis. I wasn't informed as to how much, but he had X amount of cannabis. And he was sentenced to prison for 18 years. That same week, an individual was found guilty of raping a 15-year-old, so pedophilia, and that individual was sentenced to 15 years in prison. So 18 years for being caught with cannabis, 15 years for raping a minor. And I asked him, "How's that working for your country?" And he said, "I didn't think it worked for my country, and after hearing you, I definitely do not believe this is working for my country." So it opened the door to engage in the conversation.
I think it's so important. We never prep for the show, so I haven't given you any time to think about this. One of the things that I hear a lot is our jails are filled with people who are on cannabis charges, on marijuana charges. Is there a good, easy way to figure out how to fix that? I mean the people who are there, and to fix the law so that they're not going there in the first place.
There is a bill that's being proposed at the federal level that passed the House, passed the Judiciary House in Washington at a vote of 24-10, and is going to go before the House of Representatives this year, which is the MORE Act, M-O-R-E, which stands for Marijuana Opportunity Reinvestment and Expungement Act, where it decriminalizes medical cannabis, so it deschedules it from a Schedule 1 to either Schedule 2 or Schedule 3, which makes it medically legal, right, and allows for research to be done. Federally.
Yeah.
The reinvestment, it stands for reinvesting in the communities, the black and brown communities that have been most struck by medical cannabis, as you just mentioned. And so 5% of the taxes will be reinvested in those communities. The VA will be able to recommend or prescribe cannabis to its veterans. Shout out to all the veterans that are part of my media. Jose Belen.
I love Jose.
He's been on your show a few times. Robert Roundtree, Steve, and so many others. Brett Buffenberger.
Rob just messaged me today.
So all those guys that are doing the work out there aggressively and supporting the Veterans Administration, but VA would be able to then prescribe cannabis for the veterans to manage their PTSD and eliminate the 22 that are committing suicide on a daily basis, which I believe is far more than that.
I agree.
Or the guys that are in chronic pain. But also the expungement, where it will expunge the records of those individuals that have been arrested for, having a dime bag or a nickel bag.
I didn't know that part.
Yeah, and so it'll expunge them. And for those individuals, for example, that are, 3 strikes you're out, and on that 3rd strike it was due to cannabis, that will allow them to also be, released and having their records expunged. So that's something that is in the works. It's there.
Why is there so much fight against it? Is it really because of the conspiracy theories are, and then you can tell me if it's true, conspiracy theories are it's big pharma that is primarily behind the, and of course I know you have to walk a fine line, so I'll be careful with this question. I'm thinking it out loud as we go. This is the great part about the show, no prep. But I feel like most people out there believe, they can't believe that there is so much pushback in this day and age with all of the research that's been done, the tests, the studies, and people seeing it in themselves, how the healing goes on. And yet they're still having to push back on some of the most minor things on a 24-hour basis.
It's tough. It's government, it's clergy, it's the church, regardless of the church, or the denomination that has stood up against it. It's been government, it's been big pharma, so it's a multifactorial issue. And our ancestors, our grandparents, and then this whole started in 1937. A brief history of the prohibition began in the late 30s with Harry Aslinger, who said, "Oh, we're going to change the word cannabis to marijuana," which is, for those of us in the movement, understand that is a derogatory term used for cannabis. There were some statements that were made that were, racist.
So explain. I just heard this the other day. You guys can hear us, hopefully, because I heard somebody say that it was hard to hear. I just heard this part the other day. Of all the times somebody's come on the show, I never knew the racist part of it. That's why there was an H in it instead. It's in the book. All right, so I really didn't know. It really had something. It was definitely racial driven. And when they vilified it in the 30s and really began that push, a lot of it had to do, it centered around, this is what I heard, and I don't know, Mexicans.
Yes.
And that's why the H is there, and the way it's said, and the vilification of the people, which then made people afraid of the people who were doing it, which made, of course, them afraid of marijuana.
Right. Well, here on page 14 in my book.
I haven't seen the book, read the book yet, so.
Marijuana with a J is an Americanized version of the word and rose in use in the 1930s, a period rife with new popularity and debate over the use of the substance by Harry Aslinger. And then he continued on to say, marijuana is the most violent causing drug in the history of mankind. Most marijuana smokers are Negroes, Hispanics, Filipinos, and entertainers. Their satanic music, jazz and swing, result from marijuana use. These marijuana causes white women to seek sexual relations with Negroes, entertainers, and any others.
God, Harry. Listen, God rest Harry's soul at this point, but that's the thing, I didn't know that part. And what's crazy is once something like that gets ingrained and is repeated so much and it becomes part of culture, we have a hard time as a society backing out of that, which I must imagine leads to, or at least adds to the fact of the challenge.
One of my mentors, Dr. Hernandez, when I was in medical school and in training in the Dominican Republic, always said, if you tell a lie 100 times, it becomes the truth.
Absolutely.
And then, follow that with Tricky Dick in the 70s. And then, Nancy Reagan, just say no, Nancy.
Oh, I know. Well, I did. I don't know if you know, but I used to license and look at the funding for drug and alcohol programs in the 80s and early 90s. And Straight was one of them. So Straight used to be a big program with Nancy Reagan. Scared Straight, if you've seen the documentary.
I was part of the original.
That was the scariest place I've ever been to.
I did that in the 70s in New York. Late 70s in New York, I was part of the pilot program of Scared Straight.
Oh, God, it scared me going in. And we shut them down. You can actually still Google me, and you'll see a quote I did for the Orlando Sentinel back in the day. That program was very scary, and it was just very detrimental at the time, in my opinion, at the time. All right, so this is how fast it goes, right? So we're going to share all of Joe's contact information, how you can buy the book, how you can learn more about Joe, how you can reach out to Joe, because he's very accessible, even though he travels the world, on big planes and yachts and all that good stuff. He does not.
Not now with coronavirus.
Not with coronavirus. We're not doing that. So we're big on foundation here. Foundation, that's the theme this week. So what are some of the things that are foundationally just at your core that are non-negotiables for you in the world, in business, and working with people, in the advocacy that you do? Some things that really set the tone for how you are and that you look at things through these 2, 3, 4 tenets.
Well, integrity is the first one that comes to my mind. I have done a program called Landmark Forum, which has supported me in changing my conversation and how I converse with myself and how I converse with others. And integrity means being true to your word as yourself. And so by being true to my word as myself, what I say I will do. In conjunction with what Tony Robbins has promoted for so many years, CANI, constant and never-ending improvement, which at the beginning of the show we discussed how I began as an orderly CNA and have worked my way up.
You're the poster child for that.
So those two things are the ones that pretty much dictate. And I can't get off the show without discussing what a representative in the state of Florida is presently wanting to do, and how one of our state representatives is truly defending the movement. I'm referring to Rodriguez, who has moved and promoted a capitation or a cap on the percentage of THC in the medical cannabis world, capping it at 10% for patients that are 21 years of age or younger. Number one. But then on the flip side of that, we have Representative Carlos Guillermo Smith, who has been instrumental and supportive of the LGBTQ community as well as the medical cannabis world, and in blockading and doing his best to blockade that, which I believe we should have him on your show.
I would love to have you on, Representative.
So anyone that is linked or connected with Carlos Guillermo Smith, reach out to Ted or myself with his contact information so we can be certain to have him on the TED
Bring
show.
it to the people.
But be mindful of how the government is once again wanting to manipulate and control. There's no capitation on the amount of alcohol you can buy. There's no capitation on the amount or percentage of opiates that you can be prescribed, but yet they want to capitate the cannabis. So again, integrity, constant never-ending improvement, and being true to your word as yourself.
You're a joy to have on, my friend. Always a joy.
It's
to
so
have
fun.
On. You're providing such great information to people, to the masses. It's very hard to maneuver through the minutia of what's out there on social media, on the internet, wherever you go. And so go reach out to Joe, get his book, read it, get educated, make an educated decision, stop listening to the old school way of doing things, and really bring it to the forefront. We really need your help and advocacy. Thank you so much, my friend. We love you guys. We'll see you soon.
Peace.